Governments need to be willing to do things that are out of their historical perspective, or for the most part, it's really a war footing that we need to be on.
I once was lost, oh, but now I am found. Was blind, but now I see.
Welcome to Built on Faith Homestead or Leaving Egypt, depending on which video platform you are watching this on. My name is Justin. I live with my wife, Melissa. We have 3 kids. We live in a tiny house. We do the best we can to serve the Lord and live a self-sustainable life, and we have a whole bunch of work to do on both of those, truthfully and honestly. We recognize that, and we are doing the best we can to improve those things. Today's video is going to be about Event 201 and Catastrophic Contagion 2025, and we will talk about how that relates to homesteading and self-reliance, and most of all, how that relates to you as a child of God. This video is going to be longer than some because I have to have some video clips in here. One of them's like 12 minutes long, the other one's like 6 minutes long. I will post in the description box down below links to where I got these video clips from, so that you are welcome to go look and judge for yourself what you think of these things. So, if you're not familiar with Event 201, Event 201 happened in 2018, and it was where world leaders got together, along with John Hopkins, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and some others, got together and said, hey, what would we do if a coronavirus-like thing that affected the respiratory system, what if it spread all around the world? What if we had a pandemic? What would happen? What would we do? And that in and of itself is not all that concerning to me, and this is why. We used to play what if scenarios a lot at work, right? I used to work in a public water system, and we would do these. We would do these, what if the water line breaks here and we don't have any way to isolate it really, and a whole bunch of the town's going to be out of water, then what do we do, right? Or what if we show up to a well house and it's been tampered with? What do you do then, right? And we would play these what if scenarios. However, we were not able to hit them with a level of accuracy that Event 201 seemed to what if its way into this world. So I will show you the highlight reel from Event 201 here.
It began in healthy-looking pigs, months, perhaps years ago. A new coronavirus spread silently within herds. Gradually, farmers started getting sick. Infected people got a respiratory illness with symptoms ranging from mild flu-like signs to severe pneumonia. The sickest required intensive care. Many died. Experts agree, unless it is quickly controlled, it could lead to a severe pandemic, an outbreak that circles the globe and affects people everywhere.
The mission of the Pandemic Emergency Board is to provide recommendations to deal with the major global challenges arising in response to an unfolding pandemic. The board is comprised of highly experienced leaders from business, public health, and civil society.
We could be looking at double the number of cases in 1 week and 16 times as many in a month if we are not able to stop the spread. That would be on the order of 500,000 cases, and it would continue to rise exponentially. In 3 months, we could be approaching 10 million cases.
We're at the start of what's looking like it will be a severe pandemic. And there are problems emerging that can only be solved by global business and governments working together.
We have known about CAPS-like viruses in animals and people for decades, but have not been successful at developing a licensed vaccine. And sure, there are new technologies that may help, but it's going to be difficult. I am not optimistic about having a vaccine in time to be relevant during this pandemic.
So the policy crisis in question for this board in this meeting is this. How should governments, business, and international organizations allocate and distribute pandemic antivirals and medical supplies to the people who need them most?
What we've seen work very well in the HIV field is, in fact, procurement through the Global Fund. So having a centralized mechanism, so financially able to procure on behalf of affected countries can be critical. I think the second thing is it's going to be very important that for the business sector, for manufacturers of antivirals, that we have clarity around what the need is and where the need is and who are making the decisions.
I think that given that the countries most affected are those that are low and middle income countries with unequal access to technology, to finances, the UN has a worldwide footprint, universally recognized, and universal membership.
A global stockpile would certainly help ensure more rational and strategic allocation, but the reality is that we don't have the logistics capability, even within the UN, to bring that together in one place and run it. So this is where I think a collaboration between the international organizations like the World Health Organization and the private sector, which runs these supply chains for many purposes every day, understand where the supplies are, make smart decisions about how to allocate them to the people who need them in the places that need them the most, and then work with the industry to move those supplies from where they are today to where they need to be.
Just to underscore the point that cooperation among supply chain providers or businesses that have huge supply chains can add a lot of efficiency to the whole process.
The question is, can you, through this international mechanism, really promote commitments to doing this as quickly as possible and give people a sense that actually if they contribute more, that they will have a better chance of protecting their own populations and their country's security and health?
So to be completely clear, most of this production would already be committed in contracts.
Yes.
It is almost unheard of that people are producing product without having a forward commitment for the consumption of that product. So the first thing that needs to be done, because this is not something that the countries currently control, and these countries are going to bring about emergency situations and co-opt an existing supply chain.
I think it's not likely, I agree, that countries are not going to buy a countermeasure to put into a global supply without retaining a large portion of it for themselves.
Public health agencies have issued travel advisories, while some countries have banned travel from the worst affected areas. As a result, the travel sector is taking a huge hit. Travel bookings are down 45%, and many flights have been canceled. A ripple effect is racing through the service sector. Governments that rely on travel and tourism as a large part of their economies are being hit particularly hard.
How should national leaders, businesses, and international organizations balance the risk of worsening disease that would be caused by the continued movement of people around the world against the risks of profound economic consequence of travel and trade bans?
If there's some sense that there's a UN institution that can do all of this, then I worry we're suffering from a delusional disorder on the power of the UN. It's really important to get those industries and their trade associations and an efficient leadership established, which is decentralized, but has a collective responsibility and accountability. And that needs to be supported by the public leadership.
What is essential, what is non-essential travel, we have to clarify this. Otherwise, if we go down to 20% bookings over a long period, the company will run down. That's a fact.
You know, there's a whole complex set of issues in a highly interdependent world on supply chains that are just in time. We need to think about how much flex there is in that just-in-time supply chain system and make sure it keeps running. I think it's going to take specificity, and it's going to take knowledge that only the private sector has. The UN can play an important coordinating facilitation role, but the companies know where those commodities are, where they move, how to move them, and that's where a type of public-private collaboration that we have not generally had in these crises needs to be put together pretty quickly.
We are not out of money yet, but the fact is we are trending in a dangerous direction and something needs to change.
So the policy question for this board now is, how should financial resources be prioritized? Are there nodes that we cannot allow to fail? What is your sense of priorities? We don't have money to pay for all of these urgent problems.
So at the moment, we want the funds, right? You need the money. So where's the money? So the government kind of supplies some money. A lot of, private sectors, some are sitting here, so you have some money. But now you need a really coordinated, centralized effort.
Hotels will be experiencing, crippling losses doing that. And we know that the hotel business in itself makes up 5% of the GDP.
Governments need to be willing to do things that are out of their historical perspective, or for the most part, it's really a war footing that we need to be on.
We shouldn't underestimate the power of entrepreneurship. We need to escalate that, whether it's through the government's helping with tax breaks or subsidies of that nature to increase manufacturing of those types of products. It can happen quickly. A Marshall type plan, don't mean to say that exactly, but a Marshall plan that can go into effect can stimulate change very quickly. It can happen quickly. A Marshall type plan, don't mean to say that exactly, but a Marshall plan, they can go into effect, can stimulate change very quickly.
Countries are reacting in different ways as to how best to manage the overwhelming amounts of dis- and misinformation circulating over the internet. In some cases, limited internet shutdowns are being implemented to quell panic.
How much control of information should there be, and by whom? And how can false information be effectively challenged? And what if that false information is coming from companies or from governments?
I think it's very important that we make sure that there is concise communication with all healthcare facilities where these patients are being treated so that there isn't mass panic.
We're at a moment where the social media platforms have to step forward and recognize the moment to assert that they're a technology platform and not a broadcaster is over. They, in fact, have to be a participant in broadcasting accurate information and partnering with the scientific and health communities to counterweight, if not flood the zone of accurate information, because to try to put the genie back in the bottle of the misinformation and disinformation is nigh impossible.
One thing we haven't spoken about, and I'm wondering whether it's time to talk about this, is a step up from the part of the governments on enforcement actions against fake news.
I personally do not believe that trying to shut things down in terms of information is either practical or desirable. And we do have, I think, a couple of strategies that are available to us, one of which is the flood strategy, second of which is relying and informing and equipping trusted sources of information with the facts so they can then pass that on. But we also need to actually think about a technological answer to this.
The outcome of the CAPS pandemic in Event 201 was catastrophic. 65 million people died in the first 18 months. The outbreak was small at first and initially seemed controllable, but then it started spreading in densely crowded and impoverished neighborhoods of megacities. From that point on, the spread of the disease was explosive. Within 6 months, cases were occurring in nearly every country. The global economy was in a free fall. The GDP down 11%. Stock markets around the world plummeted between 20 and 40% and headed into a downward cycle of fear and low expectation. Businesses were not borrowing, banks were not lending. Everyone was just hoping to hunker down and weather the storm. Economists say the economic turmoil caused by such a pandemic will last for years, perhaps a decade. The societal impacts, the loss of faith in government, the distrust of news, and the breakdown of social cohesion could last even longer. We have to ask, did this need to be so bad? Are there things we could have done in the 5 to 10 years leading up to the pandemic that would have lessened the catastrophic consequences? We believe the answer is yes. So, are we as a global community now finally ready to do the hard work needed to prepare for the next pandemic?
So after watching that, surely that sounded very familiar to some recent pandemic over the last few years. Surely that sounded somewhat familiar, right? And so, obviously these world leaders are planning for these types of things. And then you go on to watch Catastrophic Contagion 2025. We'll show you the videos from it here.
2 Latin American countries alerted the WHO of several outbreaks of a new infectious disease that's mysteriously appearing across the region, severe epidemic enterovirus respiratory syndrome 2025. Over the past 6 weeks alone, there have been 500 confirmed or suspected cases reported. The virus could cause a severe pandemic if early containment and mitigation efforts are not successful.
The pandemic in this type of situation and trend would be a risk for the global health security.
Pandemics are inherently political, financial, and so much broader.
We have not spoken on the leadership in country. And I think that we need to be also very careful. We cannot decide a lot of things without the leaders be involved and agree on that.
There is no substitute for national leadership.
It's important to support the local response or the national response.
Training those that are in these areas first, enabling them with the tools, protecting them, and if needs be, regional solidarity first.
At this stage, communication is key, and communication should include not just scientists with data, but also social, religious, and political leaders. At this stage, communication is key, and communication should include not just scientists with data, but also social, religious, and political leaders.
Trust. This is an essential issue, and trust was broken among countries, between populations and healthcare systems, between healthcare systems and governments.
I'm very sorry to say that in 2025, we need to strengthen the health system.
WHO needs to be a voice for the voiceless.
No one is safe until all of us are safe.
As of today, there have been an estimated 1 billion cases worldwide, with more than 20 million deaths, including nearly 15 million children. Countless millions are alive, but left with paralysis or brain damage. The most successful countries are those which invested in preparedness and trained for this moment years in advance. This included having full-time pandemic preparedness and response teams, which conducted detailed operational planning and routinely tested those plans through exercises and drills. If more countries had participated and heeded the guidance, the toll might have been much less.
Once again, you got world leaders planning these things, right? And it seems like this catastrophic contagion 2025 is more of a, this is what we did on the last pandemic, what are we going to do when the next one comes, right? I'm not trying to and not going to discuss, all of the nefarious things behind talking about these what ifs and, how this really all comes about and all that. I'm not really interested in talking about that in this video. What I do want to talk about is the fact that it seems as though world leaders are planning for these things. And that being said, the Bible teaches us these things are going to come. That pestilences is going to come. That worldwide sicknesses are going to happen. Biblically speaking, there's no way around it. Those things are going to happen. And so, all that being said, from a homesteading and self-relying type lifestyle, it makes sense, right? Grow yourself a garden, do the best you can to save seeds and be self-sufficient when those things, so you don't have to go and buy the seeds every year and all that kind of stuff. That makes sense. It makes sense to have animals and, right, those kinds of things. It makes sense to try to have the best shelter that you can, not be reliant on the grid the best you can, right? All those things. That all makes sense under that scenario, because if you remember from the videos that you just watched, because I know you watched them, you didn't just skip ahead, you definitely watched the clips. They talked about supply chain backups and economic woes and all those things, right? And so, which, by the way, biblically speaking, is going to happen as well. But you begin to understand, if you begin to understand that, hey, world leaders are planning this, and the Bible predicts it as well, from a homesteading type view, it just makes sense to prepare for those things. Also, though, I want to say this. For us as children of God, our primary goal is not to survive. It's okay to do all this stuff, right? But if you put your faith in having 50 chickens, you're being kind of dumb. If you put your faith in your milk cow, you're being kind of dumb, right? If you put your faith in your ability to work and all those, you're being kind of dumb. Our primary goal is not to survive. Our primary goal is to spread the gospel at all costs. That might include surviving, but that is not our primary goal. Our primary goal is to spread the gospel, no matter what. Our primary goal is to try to help our brothers and sisters in the Lord. And help in a biblical way, not in a worldly way, right? Which means encourage, it means correct, it means help, it means be there for them, it means joining with them, whether or not it's legal, right? To join with your brothers and sisters. So here's a crazy thing. The Bible predicts all these things, yet he continues to tell us to assemble together and gather together. Therefore, we as children of God have a responsibility to follow the Bible regardless of the cost. And so, knowing this information is one thing. What are you going to do with it now? We appreciate you guys watching. We'll catch you next time.